Good evening and welcome to Talking Point. I'm your host, Dr. Corey Nimright, coming to you live from the studios of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation in Accra. Talking Point comes to you live this and every Sunday with issues of national concern, and we engage with you in discussions for informed decision-making. We're also streaming live on GBC Ghana Online, at Facebook at Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, and as always, we welcome those listening to us on Unique 95.7. This week, Vice President Bawumia delivered a much-talked-about lecture on how the government was transforming Ghana's economy through digitalization. The impact of the internet and the digital technology on our daily lives and how we access information and public services is evident to us all. Nevertheless, the President's presentation ignited discussions about its relevance, given other perceived pressing national issues. Tonight, our panelists will help us assess the pros and cons of the government's digitalization efforts and discuss why we should strive to understand and learn more about the transformation as we move from a traditional to a digital economy. We encourage you to join in our discussion by sending your messages during the show to our WhatsApp number 055-744-6429. I'd like to welcome the panelists in the studio. With me on my far left is Honorable Fatimatu Abubakar, the Deputy Minister of Information. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And to my immediate left is Professor Ebo Turkson. He's an Associate Professor of Economics and also the Coordinator of the Economic Policy Management Program in the Department of Economics at the University of Ghana. We'd also like to publicly congratulate him on being recently promoted to Associate Professor.
Thank you.
So if I can start with you, Honorable. As I mentioned this week, the Vice President's speech has us all buzzing, transforming an economy through digitalization. So briefly, why is this important to the government's change or transformation agenda?
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying good evening to you, to Prof, and your cherished viewers at home.
Thank you.
It is very important that, thank you once again for the platform to have this very important conversation. We've realized that there are certain challenges in the system which requires that if we are able to move our data from analog to digital and also use the digital data to influence or to change the kind of processes and systems that we have in place, it will go a long way to make sure that the foundation of the economy is strong. Because an economy that is based on, that is data driven and that is led by leaders who are well informed because of availability of data is likely to succeed, as we have seen in some parts of the world. And a preamble to His Excellency the Vice President's presentation was the fact that himself as an economist and once as a visiting lecturer at the Oxford University, he had a view that economic transformation and digitalization are not mutually exclusive. In fact, many economists around the world, according to him, have also expressed that same view, that if you want to have anything of an economy, then it is important that it is driven by data and it is driven by technology.
Okay.
And in the status quo, or what we met as the status quo, was a situation whereby most public institutions had analog data. What happened is that it causes unnecessary delays, it causes unnecessary comfort in terms of public service delivery. In most instances, where there is no monopoly and there is competition between public sector institutions and those in the private sector, you realize that due to the kind of data, the storage, due to the kind of system that we have, which was the analog system, there are unnecessary delays in terms of service delivery. For instance, you go to the driver and vehicle licensing authority that you need to effect transfer on your car registration, and someone has to walk into a container or a long file room to look for a box and then look for your file. If you are lucky enough, they will come with a paper in it if you are not lucky, they will say, you know what,
come back in a week or so.
Come back in a week or so.
Okay, we'll go into the details. I wanted us to briefly, you've given us a very good introduction into why this is such an important part of the government's agenda. But I wanted to just quickly, Professor Turkson, what were your reactions when you heard the Vice President's lecture? What were your thoughts, just very briefly?
Okay, thank you, and good evening to your viewers. I was excited for one reason. For the first time, we're moving away from the normal political discussion about I've done this and done that to looking at one of the main enablers of transformation, and that is innovation and then digital technologies. And I'm excited that it's now what you are discussing, because if you cast mind back, the AU meeting in 2019, the leaders of Africa came to a realization that if we are going to realize the AU agenda for 2063, digital technology should be key. Innovation. I mean, it's not possible for firms to participate in a global value chain without being innovative and having digital technologies to help them to move into the global value chain. So it's exciting, it's refreshing that the government is trying to see how best it can improve on all processes. I mean, first, when you talk about digitalization, what we mean that human interactions, human activities are enabled by the use of tools of ICT to become more efficient, to expedite the processes involved in human interaction, all of that, and to most importantly be more cost effective. Okay. And that is key to private sector development, because the private sector needs to reduce their cost of doing business, and once they are exposed to these digital technologies, it enhances their operations, they become competitive. So I was excited that this discussion was coming on, and the Vice President listed the sort of things that is being done. Very refreshing things to hear. I tried one or two of them and they were working.
Okay, so great.
I was excited about it.
So I wanted to set the stage with a definition, because the Vice President said during his lecture that the topic was on digitalization, but during his lecture he said Ghana has been ahead of the curve of digitization, and our strategy since 2017 has been not just to repair the system but to build a new system through digital transformation. And I wanted to clarify, there is a difference between digitization and digitalization, as you mentioned, because one is the digitizing of our records, data, and encoding it. And the other is more transformative, and that is the one that you talked about in terms of converting business processes over the use of digital technologies, what have you. So what exactly are we talking about? Because it seems like we focus a lot in terms of the digital technologies on the digital practitioners, the section where we are digitizing our records more than the other pillars. Dr. Professor, yes. Since you mentioned digital technologies, I wanted us to have that, because I see it being used interchangeably, yes. And I just want to make sure that my understanding is correct and that they may be part and parcel of the same, but one is an overarching.
Precisely. So in terms of structural transformation, and given that now the global economy has become more integrated, and technology is driving everything, you want to partake in what is going on to make sure that if it's your firms or your households or whichever sector in the economy wants to participate in that overall global value chain, these institutions are going for digital technologies that will help them to participate in that. So if you look at the global value chain, it's now almost impossible to see one product being manufactured in one country. So there are processes, there are stages. And so if it starts with a digital technology in one stage and it gets into your country and want to add value to it, you also have to continue that process. So when we talk about digitalization, what we're trying to talk about is where every human activity, right from the office, from the farm, any human interaction, any human activity that we are involved in, how we are making use of tools of information, communication, and technology to enhance that process of interaction so that it becomes more efficient, it's more expeditious, and then most importantly, less costly to involve yourself in those transactions. So for instance, if I have to pay my school fees, I don't need to drive in the traffic, get to the school, go to the cash office, either pay by cash or issue a check. But I have an app that will allow me to sit in my comfort of my office and then pay my child's fees. That is the human interaction that you are using tools of ICT to enhance those interactions so that it becomes less costly, more efficient. and most importantly, remove the human interface that at times with corruption and any inefficiencies. And that is what we need to be talking about. If we need to structure our economy, if we need to transform our economy, we should be looking at these processes and how we can use ICT to do that.
Okay, so Honorable, maybe just picking back on what he said, there was a quote that President Bawumia mentioned from the World Bank president, which was a few days ago, which without digitization, we won't be able to reap the benefits of human progress. Digitization is vital in transforming social services, finance, health, education, and agriculture. So I wanted to find out if you could maybe give us some practical ways in which digitization is being used in Ghana to really provide the benefits in some of these vital areas that we've talked about, health, finance,
the country has suffered a lot of losses due to corruption in the public sector, due to waste, due to unnecessary delays. As much as possible, you want to move us away from wasting productive hours at public institutions in the name of getting services. For instance, if you look at the National Health Insurance Scheme, in the past, if you need to do renewals, you have to go back to a district office to queue the whole day, actually, so that you can get renewal. Now with just a short code, you don't even need a smartphone. You apply those technological tools through your phone to just go on the platform on your mobile phone via short number. You are able to do the renewal and also pay through mobile money. So it will save the potential customer of the service productive hours so that you can use it to do more important things.
I think your minister also mentioned drones the other day as being one of the vital things in terms of health.
Earlier on, if we talk about transporting medicines and blood and other essential services to the various health facilities across the country, it was unheard of that even helicopters will do that, not to think of drones. But with the introduction of the zipline medical drone delivery technology, we currently have 4 substations, including one in Sefriyo, so Mapon, Omenakun, among others, and government is seeking to open 2 new ones by the end of the year and introduce 2 more by next year, so that in total we will have 8 delivery stations from Kentampo to Wa to Kitikrachi, so that across the country, when people need essential services in terms of life-saving medicines, blood, antivenom, among others, which may not be available in some small communities or in some cheap compounds or clinics, they will have the benefit of a timely delivery of some of these essential products so that lives will be saved. And that is thanks to technology. Because the kind of trip that you would use a drone to make, an aboboya or tricycle or bicycle or even a VIP bus cannot make it in that time. So it has really helped us in terms of service, health service delivery. He also added that if you look at the record system in the country, once again, health service, you move from one teaching hospital to the other and they have to carry your folder with you in an ambulance. So that some doctors will now have to look at handwritings and so on just to be able to proceed with treatment. Now they've put in place a system whereby the various regional hospitals and teaching hospitals have been merged in terms of data. So if you are moved from Komfanoche Teaching Hospital or Tamale Teaching Hospital to Kolebu, as soon as you get the treatment is a click away, because the doctor will have the benefit of being informed in real time so that they can continue the process. So in general, if you look at the quality of service that we received in the public sector and in terms of health, in terms of education, because currently the government is introducing laptop to teachers which are pre-programmed with course contents in terms of textbooks and other guidelines for teachers, and also intends to provide tablets to students which are pre-programmed, which we may not even require internet to use because some of the applications can be accessed offline. then it means we are using technology to transform a lot of things in the country in diverse ways.
Okay, so Professor Turkson, I wanted to talk to you about the government. The governor of Ghana also made some statements that I want to draw some sort of analogy to. He noted that the next steps is to strengthen regulatory frameworks. He was talking specifically about the banking industry, but I want to extrapolate that into what we are talking about now. So he noted that the next steps is to strengthen regulatory frameworks so as to diffuse the benefits of the improved payment system to the wider society and tackle financial exclusion in a practical and affordable way. Now, we all know that everything has side effects. Everything has pros and everything has cons. So using that same analogy, you have digital inclusion, you have digital exclusion, you have social exclusion, you have digital literacy, digital capability. So as we are looking at all these things that make up the digital technology revolution, how are we hitting all these other areas to make sure that we are robustly moving steadfastly towards this digital or transformative economy that we are talking about?
And so if you cast your mind back, for instance, this whole revolution that is taking place in Ghana started in the 1990s when we tried to prepare the ground for building our ICT infrastructure. In the 2000s we did that, and then from 2017 we've seen a government come into power which has started actualizing the real work that has to be done for us to feel the impact of the whole process now that infrastructure is set up. Now there are other issues that come with using a digital technology. I'll give you an instance. For the past almost 3-4 years, I pay my electricity bill on my phone. And so I'm a prepaid user, and therefore I'm using the digital technology. I don't need to go to the office. I don't need to go and queue to buy. I have the app on my phone, and then I load and as and when. At times for 3 days, the system is not working. Which means then that if I don't have power, I'm going to be out of power for 3 days until the system is working. So we need, as we revolve this whole process, we need to put into place also mechanisms to ensure that people do not lose confidence in the process. Otherwise, they revert back to their old ways of doing things, and that's not what we need. So as much as possible, we need to move to the level where some of these shortcomings that come up with the use of such systems will be addressed immediately so that people have confidence in using it. I'll give you another instance. For instance, if you want to transfer money, we are encouraging financial inclusion by using the mobile money platform as a very good platform to ensure, because if you look at the number of adults that have mobile phones in this country, there is no way our banking infrastructure would have reached everybody. So now they're having access to some financial services through the mobile phone technology. But if at certain times the whole platform, the system is not working, and people need to receive payment for goods that they've just delivered or for services that they just delivered, we have cases where people say, no, I don't want to give you my money, and we want to have a cash-light society. So we need to tackle the other issues that are going to arise. There are also security issues at stake. There are cyber crimes that could come up. If you don't take care, you lose your money in terms of even the e-currency that is going to come, the ECD, all of that. So we need to put in place also infrastructure to curb all those things that could discourage people from using these digital technologies. And so once we are excited that we are improving business processes, once we are excited that we are having things done in a very timely fashion, and for government, it should be a very good avenue for government to look up its revenue, domestic revenue. Because now people are not going to go to houses, collect property rates. They should have an app where they can pay their property rates right into government chest, and then to reduce all the human interface. So we need to also build all of those things that we need to we should be able to foretell some of these problems that will come up and put in place mechanisms and plan for it. We should be able to get there when these problems start coming up before you plan for it, because they are going to come up. And so to take examples of countries that have gone ahead of us and how they were able to get around those problems, and to do that, it becomes something that will be very useful to us.
Okay. Honorable, so there was a professor at a private university, Professor Francis Gatsi, and unfortunately I don't have the data here in terms of the year of the report, but he issued a paper on digital technologies and issues in Ghana, where he talked about the average wage of a Ghanaian and compared that to the data cost and how expensive data costs were. So as we're moving towards the digitization arena, those are things that we have to think about. So I wanted to ask you, the Ghana Investment Fund for Electronic Communications is mandated by law to provide resources for the establishment of universal service and universal access to all communities. And it goes further to say that it's also supposed to facilitate the provision of access to basic telephony, internet services, multimedia, broadband, and broadcasting services, so that it can play a critical role in the digital transformation of rural settings. So how are we doing in terms of this universal access to people, especially in the rural areas where it's so critical? Because as we are moving towards this digitization, we don't hopefully want anyone left behind. So maybe you can talk to us about the efforts that are being made in this direction.
Okay, thank you very much. As His Excellency the Vice President mentioned, this efforts at digitalization is meant to ensure inclusion. So the expectation is that if we are able to put the proper infrastructure in place, the kind of infrastructure that would help the country to plan and provide for the general populace, then eventually we are all going to reap the benefit of it. It is for that reason that if you look at access to internet, in terms of coverage, that's at 2017, we barely had 26%. But currently that has moved to 50%. We recognize the fact that in terms of access, we haven't covered the entire country and we haven't reached the targets yet. But since we have put out this kind of efforts on government that has the goodwill and intention to make sure we put all our efforts towards digitalization, then it will also require that we put in the necessary investments so that we can have the digital infrastructure in place. Consequently, you would realize that when it comes to education, as I mentioned earlier on, the government is providing laptop to teachers. It's not only for teachers in the cities, it includes teachers in the rural areas to be able to access those kind of gadgets, which may not even require internet service, but they will have the materials for students. So as and when the internet service reaches there can be some reviews. Technology evolves, and as and when we are able to put in the appropriate infrastructure to make sure we attain universal coverage, then the other things that ought to come with it will necessarily follow suit. For instance, in the area of security, His Excellency the Vice President mentioned that we barely had 800 cameras in terms of surveillance, so that the police would have a rapid response team to address issues like accidents on the road and robberies, among others. And currently the government has been able to add on that numbers from 800 to 10,000. And the result is that you see some pictures or clips all over social media of how the police service is using those cameras to improve their surveillance system and also to curb crime on our various roads. So of course it requires the investments of governments, but fundamentally what we have done is that we have to put those soft infrastructure that were non-existent earlier on in place, so that subsequently we can make the necessary investments to build upon those infrastructure and make improvements. So that is what the government is currently focusing on.
Okay, I mean, I think key to that is not just availability and not just access, but also affordability. Because at the end of it's available, but people can't afford the service. Then even the desire for inclusion will be minimized because of the inability for people to.
If you remember, quite recently there were regulations by the National Communications Authority and also the Minister responsible for communication and digitalization to review consumption of data and how the telcos cost data, to the extent that, you know, at first you will buy some data from telcos, and in a month, whether you exhausted the data or you didn't, they will say that it has expired. Now you are able to access data which has no expiry, so that you get value for money. So it's a continuous process of trying to engage the stakeholders and make sure continuously.
We talked a lot about data, you know, and how, and when we mentioned the telcos, I remembered we did a program not too long ago about the new transition that we all have to go into the telcos and update our data. And there was a lot of concern by a lot of people because, again, our data is being asked for. And the assurance that how is our data being protected is coming up. You mentioned cybercrime, you mentioned, you know, all these things. So my question to you, Professor Turkson, is now that we are not in the brick and mortar arena where people didn't need as much data from us, and now you are buying things online, so people are capturing not only your personal data but your financial data and all these things, how robust are our privacy laws? Because right now we are not only concerned about protecting current consumer data, but have they been maybe upgraded to ensure that as we are moving very fast actually in this area, that we are protecting the citizens when it comes to data collection?
I was very uncomfortable about the news that our data was going to be made available, and I thought that was not good for a system that was now being introduced, and for us to get people to have confidence in using those platforms to have our data available to a third party. I'm not too sure where we've got into with that, but I think that it's important that, like you said, if we are going to get the entire nation to make use of these data technologies, we give them the assurance that they are protected against any invasion into their privacy, and also especially financial data that could cause them to lose their worth, especially when we want to introduce an e-currency. And the ECD means that you have the money electronically. It could be on your phone, and it could go to anybody. So I think that we need, I know why the government might want to have access to some information, and also to fight crime and all of that, but I think that what is important is to let the average user of these technologies be aware that the information that is being sought is not meant to be used against anyone. You know, in this part of the world, it could be used for so many things. But to ensure that the whole process has integrity, and to ensure that maybe it is to protect us from the intrusion of other persons into our personal data and all of that, and to secure it. I think that it's critical that we do that. But I cannot say where we've got into now. I mean, it's the government that will be able to tell us where we've got into now. But I think that one thing that I've been asking myself, why we even need a communication service tax at the moment, because when data becomes more expensive, people will decide not to use them. I mean, and I think that if we've captured a lot of people into the tax net now because of the Ghana card, we should look at other sources of raising tax revenue and remove the communication service tax to make data very cheap for people to begin to use it. Because you see, there's a whole economy around digitalization that will create jobs, and that will also let our economy grow. And you can tax people out of their income if they are involved themselves in these sort of activities, rather than be taxing the infrastructure that they need to involve in those activities. So I think the government should take a second look at the communication service tax. If it's possible, let us remove it from there. And then get more people to be involved, buy more data, and then economic activities that come out of that process, people could pay income taxes and government can get back the revenue. Yes.
So, Honorable, you know, the thing many people have been talking about is this Ghana card, e-passport, and all those things. So I want to give you a few minutes to just explain that in detail so people can really understand what it is that the government intends to do with the Ghana card and e-passport and all that.
Okay, first of all, you know, we did not have that universal unique identification in terms of knowing who a Ghanaian is. We had a system whereby we had a birth and death registry, they issue birth certificates, but earlier on that data was not available to, if you did the registration at Kumasi, that information was not available to a bank to check your credit ratings. That information was not available to someone at the airport to check the risk, the travel risk that a particular individual had. You have a passport that was also sitting somewhere but wasn't synchronized with other systems within the country, so that we have a means of verifying one's footprint and not having someone use a different name for passport, a different name for birth certificate, a different name for voter's ID, and so on and so forth. But now the government intends to build a new system through the Ghana card, which is a collaboration between the National Identification Authority and an indigenous company called Margins Group, where we will have that unique number that seeks to bring the digital data at the various state institutions together to the extent that, including merging information on the Ghana card with that of the passport. And quite recently you heard that SNIT from January 2022 would recognize the Ghana card number as the SNIT number. Likewise with the tax identification number from the Registrar General's Department. What that seeks to do is that, like other jurisdictions like the United States, where they have the passport booklet and passport card, the information on the Ghana card and that of the passport has been made such that Ghana, as a member of the International Civil Aviation Organization, will be able to have a Ghanaian citizen outside the country who is not holding a passport booklet use the Ghana card as a Ghanaian diasporan to be able to come back home, because the information on the Ghana card would have been made available to over 44,000 airports across the world, so that those who are stranded without their booklets will be able to come home. And also, it is also the case that the ICAO, or the International Civil Aviation Organization, is seeking to introduce e-visas in the near future, whereby they'll be able to issue electronic visas, and if they're able to access your card, then you can travel without necessarily walking to an embassy to get a visa and joining queues and all those hassles that come with international travels. You can, at the comfort of your home, apply for the visa, and because they have your digital footprints in terms of the data on the card, they will be able to give the kind of clearance or visa you are expected to travel with electronically. And you just hold your card and walk through the system. So what it seeks to do is to ensure that we have that kind of card that is credible and competitive enough as we have in the developed countries. So I think it is one area that he mentioned that a lot of people were excited about. But the Ghana card is not necessarily just for the passport or e-travels. You realize that in Ghana we have so many challenges with the emergency response teams and also the banks in terms of risk, even the police service. For instance, now that you have your fingerprints on the Ghana card database, if there is a crime, it is easy to make that kind of fingerprint swipes and then put it in the database and ensure that you are able to address some of those issues urgently. So the Ghana card seeks to bring together all the digital infrastructure or data that are sitting in isolation at the various public institutions together. And with that measure, you have a very powerful card which you can use for all forms of transaction and then put your footprints across, including international travels.
Okay, so that also brings to mind the question I asked Professor Turkson about privacy laws, because governments are known to sometimes interfere with citizen records. So when you mention that, my question becomes, so you're collecting all this data through digital transactions, the government has access to that. How do we know that our laws are going to be enhanced so that the government will not be able to unlawfully have access to our records?
When that data is in the hands of government, really, primarily, it is meant to help government to do proper planning and know about the demographics, because a lot of countries are using AIs, they are using search data to help the countries to plan. But it also means that the government will have the responsibility to put in place the appropriate legislations and safeguards, so that if those data by mistake fall into any hands or any private hands, they will be able to hold those individuals accountable and not to allow them to use them for anything unlawful. You are also aware that, for instance, for social media and other international platforms that are not unique to only Ghana, there are international laws that seek to hold developers accountable to ensure that they also provide some level of protection in terms of digital data. So it is not the case that when government mobilizes data, they will just release it to anybody at all for them to use it for undesirable things, but to make sure it helps us with planning.
I think the question is not the intention, but the question is the protection of the citizen. So even though government may not intend to do that, there should be laws that are developed to actually even protect how the data is accessed, how it's used, and everything else. So maybe that's something that can be thought of as we move along. So we've talked about all these wonderful things that this new digitalization effort is going to give us, but there are people who are also concerned about the fact that how connected is it to my bread and butter? And I want to read one of the questions that I got for you, and this is for both of you to answer. It says the claims being made are not the solutions to the creation of jobs, improved education system, standard of living, galloping petrol prices, housing deficit, pothole-ridden roads, flooded city roads and highways, dark streets, traffic-choked streets with ministers and party activists crisscrossing carelessly under police escorts, attack on COVID-19 and health-related issues and more. Ghanaians want solutions to those problems now, not digitalization, which doesn't even make provision for cross-communication and linkage between one government system and another. So I just want both of you to weigh in on this, because I'll start with you, Professor Turks, and then I'll go to Honorable.
Yeah, I think that one of the use the government can put all of this very important revolution that is taking place in transforming economic development, how does that lead to domestic resource mobilization? It's critical. I mean, the little problem that your viewer listed boils down to government providing services to help create jobs, to reduce the cost of doing business in the country, to reduce hardships and stuff like that. And so you want to ask yourself, to what extent is the Ghana Revenue Authority equipped to make use of these digital technologies to increase revenue? We need to at least collect revenue up to about 22-23% of our GDP.
Where are we now?
We are now around 17%, and it's not good. But we are told that the Ghana card should be able to help us now, because now we've identified those who should be paying taxes, but initially we didn't have that information. As Honorable Minister was talking about the use of the Ghana card, that is one main reason that the government should be excited that now I can tell those who are eligible to pay taxes, and now I can pursue them to pay their taxes. But you see, it all boils down to how efficient the Ghana Revenue Authority is going to be. Is it possible that if I'm a self-employed person, I have a digital app that I could just pay my taxes? I don't have to go and queue at the Ghana Revenue Authority. I mean, I remember when we started the tax time for the taxi drivers, at times when it's due to the end of the month, they need to return their payments. You go to all along the Ghana Revenue offices, and the taxi cabs are parked there. I mean, some of them complain that it takes them hours. These are the sort of things that we need to take advantage of the digitalization. We need apps that will help them to pay their taxes. I mean, in a well-developed countries, you assess yourself and then you file your taxes. You don't have to go to any office to do that. So we need to make use of this platform to do a self-assessment and then file our taxes. That is the only way government can be able to raise enough revenue. Remove the human interface is critical, because, I mean, I had a situation where somebody knocked on my gate and said, I'm coming from my district and this is a form, this is a property rate. When you're ready, call me and let me come and take the money and pay. I said, no, I'm not going to call you. I mean, at this day and age, I should have a platform where, yes, I can go key my
your house number, whatever it is.
These digital addresses that we have. That's what you use them for. I key in my house number, my digital address. It tells me the value of my property because the population housing census, when they came and they asked us about housing, how many toilets do you have? I mean, they're trying to get a hint about the value of the property that we can make use of that. So then I pay on the app. The money goes into the government platform. There is no human interface. Government is able to collect the revenue. It is when government is collecting enough revenue that these services, that is when the average Ghanaian will begin to feel the impact of all of this, because now government has money to provide the infrastructure that we need. We need to expand the productive capacity of this economy. Government is finding it difficult raising enough revenue to be able to provide all the infrastructure needs that we have. Because we've got to transform the Ghanaian economy by not building infrastructure. Roads, technologies of how do our firms have access to technology that will allow them to be competitive. And these are all sort of things that the government will have to take the lead. The East Asian tigers who developed so fast had a benevolent public service that was efficient in the delivery of public services, but the private sector didn't have any issues at all getting access to government services, getting the right environment to be competitive, and then they were able to compete and become one of the world's giants in trade. That is what we need to do. I mean, firms should not have 5-6 employees who are not into direct production. But what they are doing is meeting their business regulations, government regulations, filing taxes, paying social security, and that is all the staff are doing. And these are huge costs to private sector firms. They need all their workers to be directly involved in production, and they can use the digital technology to make all these payments and satisfy all the business regulations that they need to. And that is one key thing that I think that the government should make good use of this digital technology, this digitalization. And I read in the Vice President's statement how platforms were being built by the Ghana Revenue, all of that. I hope that we continue the process and get to a conclusion so that, I mean, all Ghanaians can go there. Imagine about this electronic, what do you call, insurance with a code. I tried a code and I noticed that all my cars had the insurance, everything was perfect. We need to move it to now the Ghana Revenue. How do they collect revenue? So that, I mean, it will come with some job losses, there's no doubt. Now that we have platforms, especially in the banking system, in some of the public services, we reduce the size of them, because when you go to work, there's nothing to do. I don't know the last time I walk into my bank. I always do my money payments, I go to the ATM, all of everything is online. So then it's going to come, but then it's going to open other opportunities in the economy that people can find themselves. The fintech industry is going to go, because that is where the economy is moving to. So we need to see how best we can facilitate all of these things so that government will benefit. So if government benefits and government collects more revenue, that revenue can go into providing the necessary infrastructure and services so the average Ghanaian will have an environment that is more conducive for business, to create jobs so that the average Ghanaian can work in there. And the message you got from that gentleman, whoever it is, would have been answered by government if government is able to do that.
So, Honorable, I'll ask the question also in another way, because he answered it quite succinctly. You know, the Vice President always talks about the fact that government is pursuing the digitization agenda as part of an economic strategy. So when he says that you cannot devolve the two are connected. So having said that, what is the relationship between the digital economy and our economic development and growth? And I don't know if we can have an effective conversation about this without necessarily trying to talk about the impact of this transformation on economic activity. So maybe you can answer that side of the question for us.
Okay. Governments, as Prof said, government's inability to mobilize revenue has dire consequences on everything that you mentioned on your sheet. It has impact on how many roads we can have, how many schools, how many hospitals. Its impact is immeasurable. It affects everything. And most importantly, when there is pressure on government to provide social amenities, but government is unable to generate enough revenue, it means one thing, that you go out there on the bond market, or you go out there to pursue other source of income through grants or borrowing. When you go out there to borrow, you are borrowing in dollars or other foreign currency. Now those debts ought to be repaid in foreign currency, and they ought to be serviced. And in trying to raise those kind of monies, you realize that it puts an unnecessary pressure on the value of your local currency, and it leads to a decline in terms of value. And then importers would have to change into foreign currency that is already under pressure to get goods and services and bring it into the country and then pass on the cost to consumers. So inability of the government's inability to mobilize revenue impacts everything in the country. So we cannot possibly divorce that kind of conversation. And on the other hand, you realize that, for instance, if we are able to use the Ghana.gov platform, which is currently in place, that you can access on your mobile phone. If you have an Android phone, through the Google Play Store, if you have an iPhone through the Apple Store, you access the app, you are able to go on that platform to make all payments to government through that single window, such that, for instance, a file you can pay through mobile money or your bank on that same Ghana.gov platform. You can be issued an e-certificate. If you fail to comply, if there are some irregularities, they can also check the self-assessment information and address all issues that will come out of the assessment. It also means that it will help government to cut the corruption and the waste. Because you go to some institutions and an individual is sitting there, take 5 Ghana cedis, only 1 cedi is going to government, and 4 cedis is going to someone's pocket to enrich himself. If we have the benefit of the platform, it means all revenue mobilized by government goes directly into government's accounts, and it goes a long way to strengthen government to oversee payments of compensations, oversees provision of social amenities, among others. So in fact, if we are able to get the systems in place, which we currently have in place, because the Ghana.gov platform was designed by a consortium of local developers, young Ghanaian men, who are also, through some of these services that they've provided, made success out of technology for themselves and also to help the country build something that is efficient.
Okay, let me just quickly, I don't want to interrupt you, but we're running out of time, and we have some messages here that I want to read. So the first one is, Madam, do you know, and forgive me, I'm not going to pronounce this right, Fanjeyinyeko. If you give a teacher a laptop, that teacher will walk 6 miles before that teacher will get lights to charge the laptop. I don't know what that word was supposed to be. The second one is, may I know from the Deputy Minister the steps her ministry is taking to digitalize agriculture, since agric is the backbone of our economy. I'll just read them and then afterwards. Please, good evening. When will government start to distribute the laptops for teachers? And then another one is assessing Ghana's digitalization agenda. It's a good way for Ghana. And this is from K.O. Abuaji in Kumasi. And then we have another one. Good evening. Government's digitalization program is on point. I've been trying to get a transfer for my daughter, and on the 3rd day in her school, I had to go chasing one official to the other to get clearance from each of them separately. At the end of the day, I hadn't finished getting all the clearance needed, and as I tried explaining the medical for the school to become digitalized, he wasn't sure if he was understood. But basically, it's a kudos for what is happening. And the final question is, good evening, please. NAPCO trainees are now jobless. We have been asked to go home. This government cannot be trusted because NAPCO trainees were promised permanent employment. I don't know how true that is, but you can address it. We are frustrated now. Please come to our aid. So if you could take a few of those questions, Honorable. The one about your ministry.
In the area of agriculture, you just asked. Currently, we have the Ghana Commodity Exchange in place, and they are focusing for beginners on grains. So what is happening is that the various warehouses that have been built across the country through the district assemblies, through National Food and Buffer Stock Company, and also the Ministry of Social Development Initiatives, collaborate with the Ghana Commodity Exchange, so that if you are a farmer and you are registered on the Ghana Commodity Exchange, and the last time we had a press briefing, they had about 33,000 farmers on the platform and growing, and they were targeting 300,000 by next year, and those numbers kept growing even as at the time of the press briefing. The farmers get the benefit of sending their grains to the warehouses and receiving some form of certification or some form of receipt for payments, whether those grains have been bought or not. And we use that platform through the Ghana Commodity Exchange to look for ready markets to purchase those goods. So you realize that we are moving towards a space or an era where you don't necessarily have to farm and then look for markets and then look for financing and then now look for means of transport to carry your farm produce to the market and look for buyers. Okay. And when you fail to get buyers, then those products are rotten. Okay. Now with the warehousing system and the Ghana Commodity Exchange in place, we are able to assist a lot of farmers to be able to trade just as we have a stock exchange without necessarily going around frustrated with lack of markets.
Okay, so the second question was, when will the laptop for teachers be distributed?
Absolutely. The registration had already begun about 2 months ago.
Well, I think they said when. Do you have any idea of the time frame?
It's ongoing. Yes, it's ongoing.
And the final one was on the NABCO trainees who have been asked to go home. Do you have any information
about that? There was a communication by the coordinator that they should be allowed to remain in that post. So it is not the case that there is a directive that they should go home.
Okay. All right, so Prof. Turkson, talking about NABCO, my mind immediately goes to unemployment. And you mentioned not too long ago about, the fact that some bankers, some people in the banking industry may, lose their jobs because of what's happening, and you alluded to fintech. So you have unskilled labor versus skilled labor, and the creation of the have versus have not. So are we going to create a system of structural unemployment as we're going through this phase, and how are we protecting those who are unskilled, who equally need jobs as we move towards this new digitization?
Okay, thank you. I think that we need to invest in human capital in terms of the digital technologies. It's important. So right from the primary school, if we could, I mean, we have kids at home who make use of our mobile phones, sometimes on our mobile phones there. So they are aware. We need to put the infrastructure in place to make the kids very digital aware, to use it usefully. I mean, not to use it in ways that will not help us. So that once you're able to do that, then it means that not only is the awareness created, but people have the skill to make use of the technology. And so it could lead us initially to some structural unemployment, but people should be able to quickly reskill and transition into areas that are also now expanding, blossoming because of the digital technologies. I mean, look at this platform for online sales and all of that. These are sectors that are coming up. Delivery men are now the new area where people low skill sort of jobs are coming out in that area. They need training constantly to do the delivery in a more polite way. And I mean, so these are all areas that we need capacity to train, to take advantage of it. We also need to encourage SMEs to adopt digital technologies. I mean, SMEs are the engine of growth in this economy. They employ the masses of those who are in the labor force. And once they make use of digital technologies to improve their productivity, these firms will also do well. They pay higher incomes, people will be paid well, and so on and so forth. And then also, most importantly, we need to improve the internet infrastructure. It's quite key. Those of us in Accra or in areas where the internet is very good, we can easily have access to the Ghana.gov platform, which is a very good platform. But then there are a lot of people who, even if you travel in some parts in Accra, connecting to the internet is very difficult, and accessing the Ghana.gov platform is going to be very difficult. So we need to improve on the internet connectivity, and that is what we need to get the service providers to give them this infrastructure for them to invest in improving the technology and not concentrate only in Accra, because we need the masses of people in the rural areas to partake in all of these revolution that is taking place, because they cannot be left behind. And like you asked, Honorable, what are we doing in agriculture? Because also we are an agrarian economy. There's no doubt about it. We've not been moving into industrialization. We are now going to do some agro-processing. But that will really succeed when agriculture is doing well. Even remember our experience with agro-processing during commerce time didn't work because agriculture didn't take off. It never gave industry the support. This is the time we need agriculture to do well. And especially the e-platforms where they can market their product and all of that for the farmers. It's also good. Here they will need some support in terms of the training for them to make access to. When they have mobile phones, they do mobile money and stuff. They should be able to be trained to do basic stuff, especially in terms of marketing their product and so on and so forth. And also, most importantly, I think that we need to also make sure that we are using the digital technology to improve our regulatory environment. The private sector will always complain about the regulatory environment. We need to use that to improve the environment, because the cost of doing business in Ghana, even though has started declining, is quite high. And if you are going to attract the giants in industry, if you are going to even within our domestic economy create giants of industry, create the captains of industry that we need, indigenous businessmen, they need the environment that will help them to succeed and to build empires, and not to do businesses that collapse in just another term. So it's important that we take a look at all of these things to ensure that people now do not only have access to the infrastructure, but people are making good use of the infrastructure.
And I think as we even talk about infrastructure, the most important thing is how far is the reach of electricity? Because as we start talking about these things, that becomes a very critical part of everything that we are doing on a daily basis. You know, good roads, electricity, all those things form part of everything. I'm going to ask a question just to bring some levity into the situation, but I think we're running out of time. So I'll ask you, maybe I'll ask you for your final thoughts. But in your final thoughts, I wanted, there's a social exclusion that comes with digitalization. And in the past, you'd visit your grandparents, you'd visit them in the village, all those things. I mean, we've talked about how that is falling apart. And it's even worse now because I don't have to go anymore. I can just buy something and have it delivered in the village. So we still have that. Those are some of the cons, if you will, of what is happening. But we don't have enough time to delve into all those things. So I'll just ask you, Professor Turkson, if you could just give us your concluding thoughts. And then...
Yeah, definitely there are going to be cons with all of this revolution that is taking place, but I think that the pros outnumber the cons. We should find ways in which we can also find how to reduce the social exclusion because of that. This is when you even go out to parties and stuff like that. Everybody's on the phone, nobody's having a chat with each other. And so it's now become a way of life. We should find a way in which we can address the social exclusion, because if you are not careful, that's going to create also other social problems that we need to deal with. But I think that also than that, Ghana is on the right track. I'm excited about the e-currency, ECD thing. I think that if you have a cash-light society, it's good for us. Robberies and things will cease because people do not have to transport cash from one bank to pay for something. You have these robbers chasing them and stuff like that. And I think that the economy will become relatively